Good evening, good morrow, and good day, and welcome to another edition of Slice and Dice, or should I say, an edition of Slice of the Rings. So in this video, I'm going to be talking all about basically moving from 5e, from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, into Lord of the Rings role-playing, and how that can be a seamless transition, trying to make this as easy as possible.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
First of all, then, is the Lore Master, or as would be known in 5th edition, the Dungeon Master, or in other gaming systems, the Game Master. But yes, it's got Master at the end. The Lore Master is the person running the game, essentially.
It has no other master.
The player who will take the mantle of the Lore Master should be familiar with the entirety of this volume.
Fool of a took!
That's the Lore Master, and then we have the players and their player characters, or as they're known in Lord of the Rings role-playing, their player heroes. Not so a big distinction. There is an emphasis on heroic player heroes in Lord of the Rings role-playing. Now, that doesn't mean you treat them any differently to player characters, like death is very much a thing, and in fact, in Lord of the Rings role-playing, there are less opportunities to heal because there aren't really spells.
My body is broken.
In the book, Chapter 2, New Rules, which is specifically really for anyone coming into the system for the first time, and so that's what I'm going to be drawing on directly here. So it talks about the pillars of adventure. The 3 pillars of adventure you'll be familiar with from Dungeons & Dragons, that being combat, exploration, and social. The 3 pillars exist in this game as well, only they have slightly different names and they work in a slightly different way in places. So the 3 categories, broad categories we have here are combat, council, and journey. Combat is basically the same as 5e. In fact, it doesn't actually give you the rules in combat in here. In fact, as I recall, it has about a sentence or two in summation of combat, which basically says, look at the 5e rules for combat. So it does assume some knowledge of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons coming into this. So if you are moving from 5e, this should be pretty straightforward to you.
What are we waiting for?
Then they have Council. Council comprises social interaction, in particular those occasions when the player heroes meet with the wise and the great of Middle-earth to offer their services in the fight against the enemy or to seek their aid or counsel. When the company meets one or more non-player characters in a formal gathering, a council occurs.
Strangers from distant lands, friends of old, you've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor.
While much of what transpires in a council can be played out as a dialogue between the company and the Lore Master, the company refers to our band of adventurers, with a bit more of a emphasis on collaboration and being a team, rather than we've been thrown together by chance kind of thing.
9 companions. So be it.
The Lord of the Rings role-playing introduces new rules to determine the result of such encounters and their consequences in council, which is definitely something I'll cover in another video.
Do not ask your pardon, Master Elrond.
And then we have Journey, which is exploration, essentially. Journey is an activity that is almost synonymous with adventuring in Middle-earth, travelling across a vast, dangerous land dotted by the relics of a past going back for many ages. Each journey will test the company, and the player heroes will have to rely on their skills in order to make their way to their destination safely. There are mechanics to this, dice rolls and the rest, some drawing out maps and things like that. It's good fun, and of course, that will be in another video. So, as I said, the company, or the fellowship, or whatever else you'd like to call them, try to get your party to call themselves anything other than the fellowship. I dare you. I dare you.
You have no power here.
And as well as your company of adventurers, which is obviously your player heroes, the players around the table, you also, a big emphasis in this is patrons. Your patrons are not only wise and powerful people that may give you tasks, as in 5e, you may collaborate with a patron, but there are also material benefits to the company having a patron, such as their pool of essentially inspirations known as fellowship points. And so you get a fellowship point for every member of the company. So every player hero brings 1 fellowship point to the pool. And then depending on which patron you choose, you can get bonuses to the amount of fellowship points. Unlike inspiration, which your characters can have as well, your player heroes each can have an inspiration as per 5e. The fellowship points, you can take a point from the fellowship point pool, but only at the consent of the rest of the company. So this is where it requires some collaboration and teamwork. You all have to come to an agreement when you can use a fellowship point, and that means you can reserve it for a dire situation, such as maybe doing death saving throws. There are also some new skills in Lord of the Rings role-playing, and there's been a few tweaks from 5th edition. First of all, instead of having survival checks, as in 5th edition, that skill has basically been separated into 3 skills, because that's how important it is, especially for journeys, as you'll find out in that video. Shameless plug.
Shameless plug!
So first of those 3 is Explore. A wisdom explore check may be required during a journey to find out where the company is heading or to get back on track after a detour.
That was just a detour. A shortcut. A shortcut to what?
Mushrooms!
To cope with adverse weather conditions or other natural hazards, to create paths through the wilderness suitable for others to follow, or to choose a suitable place to set up camp. It's also used in the journey by scouts, but for setting up camp and that sort of thing.
We shall rest here tonight.
Next we have hunting. A wisdom hunting check is required when hunting wild game or to follow tracks and identify a quarry by its spoor. This skill also covers fishing and preparing traps. In wilder areas, hunters learn to apply their trade to more dangerous creatures, such as orcs, spiders or wargs, or else risk becoming the prey. I would also use this for foraging as well.
A hobbit lay here.
And the third of the survival iterations in skills are travel checks. A successful travel check, wisdom travel check, may let a player hero estimate the length of a journey, read a map, and even evaluate whether a group of strangers on the road can be approached safely or if they should be left alone instead.
Get off the road! Quick!
That is the third of our survival based checks. So explore, hunting, and travel. Other new checks that they have, instead of history, you essentially have old lore, which is also based off of intelligence. An intelligence old lore check measures the ability of a player hero to recall obscure information from bygone days, such as knowledge of the ancient tales of the elder days. This knowledge may derive from different sources, from stories heard around the fire to the dusty records of a chronicler. So very much history checks with a different name. And then finally, there's also Riddle, which is unique, I would say, to Lord of the Rings role-playing, but you know how in Middle-earth they love their riddles.
Why don't we have a game of riddles?
An intelligence riddle check is used to gain helpful insight from a spoken or written riddle, but also to draw conclusions from seemingly unconnected scraps of information by deduction, reasoning, and intuition. So it's not just, as the surface name would suggest, that it's just about decoding riddles, it's also about joining the dots, essentially.
You still speak in riddles.
One other change that they have to skills in Lord of the Rings role-playing is that medicine checks have now been changed to intelligence rather than wisdom-based. It's really a way to preserve the balance between abilities, because otherwise wisdom becomes a bit too powerful. Wisdom is also used for shadow. The higher your wisdom, the higher your shadow score, and that means that the more shadow points you can attain before you get corrupted by the shadow. We'll talk about the shadow in another video, but it's a really interesting mechanic for stopping your player heroes going full Boromir.
You will take the rings and Sauron! You will betray us!
Well, or maybe helping them become more Boromir.
Curse you! Curse you! And all the halflings!
They also have some new tools in Lord of the Rings role-playing that are not in 5e. The chief amongst those, I would say, are pipes.
Can't be. It has long bottom leaf.
If you are proficient with pipes and you smoke a pipe for an hour or more, once per long rest, you can grant yourself inspiration from your ponderings. That's in the book. I'm not making this up.
Field of victory, enjoying a few well-earned comforts.
And the final thing with skills that they're introduced in Lord of the Rings role-playing is the concept of a magical success.
You shall not pass!
So there are some abilities and there are some feats and so on that allow characters and player heroes to achieve magical successes. For instance, elves can achieve a magical success on skill checks a number of times equal to their proficiency bonus per long rest, because, you know, sometimes elves can apparently do things that no other mortals can. I mean, just think of Legolas in Lord of the Rings, the films. You also get magical successes from items as well. I think actually that's probably the chief way of being able to achieve magical successes in things. Possessing a talent or artifact capable of unlocking a magical success on an ability check grants a player hero automatic success, regardless of the DC and ignoring conditions. During contests, a player hero who obtains a magical success automatically wins the contest, unless the other participant also obtains a magical success. Yeah, I think they definitely captured that with Legolas in the films, definitely.
I feel something. A slight tingle in my fingers.
Whenever it is necessary to know the exact result of the roll, a player hero who achieves a magical success counts as having rolled a 20 on the d20. So it is essentially like a critical success, only even better than that you can achieve things that would otherwise be impossible. With an athletics check, climb a sheer wall of rock without tools, or jump across a chasm 20 feet wide in full gear. It's going beyond the feats of mortals, basically, but not extremely over that, but just enough over that it's like, oh, that's very impressive and very unlikely to happen. Other things that they have sort of adapted from 5e is they use the variant encumbrance rule from 5e. So there is a lot more of an emphasis on how much you're carrying, and so therefore, especially if you have player heroes who have a low strength score, because your carrying capacity is determined by your strength. I won't go into the rules of that, but it is variant encumbrance from 5e, so just look that up and it's exactly the same as that. Oh, and dwarves can carry twice as much as everyone else, because
Nobody tosses a dwarf!
But it also means that your player heroes are more likely to have to buy pack animals and such to carry their gear, which is great because it adds to the realism. It also gives them pets, and you know that D&D players love their pets.
Go after the pets. Go after the pets. Go after the pets.
No one likes it when you go after the pets. They've also adapted resting in Lord of the Rings role-playing slightly as well. The Lord of the Rings role-playing employs a variant of the standard 5e rules for short and long rests. Player heroes can benefit from long rests exclusively in sheltered and safe refuges, i.e. not on the road. The safe havens of the company certainly count as sheltered refuges, as well as any city or settlement where the company is welcomed on friendly terms. At the Lawmaster's discretion, a deserted but well-sheltered place in the world could also be suitable for a long rest. So, as the Lawmaster, you want to be a little bit more strict on where players can long rest.
Take some rest.
I will find no rest here.
Additionally, a short rest during a journey must be at least 8 hours long, during which a character sleeps or performs only light activities. Once the player heroes stop travelling for at least 24 hours, because they have reached their destination, or have decided to stop along the way, they can resume taking short rests of 1 hour. So you can have 1 hour short rest when you're in safety, but if you're on the road, if you're travelling, or in the wilds, it's essentially an overnight rest is a short rest. So what would mechanically normally be a long rest in 5e is actually a short rest in Lord of the Rings role-playing.
3 days and nights pursuit. No food, no rest,
Now, on to the things that are most interesting for player heroes, of course, and I will definitely do a video on building characters. Got to be done. So, cultures is the Lord of the Rings role-playing term for races or species as they would be in 5e. In Lord of the Rings role-playing, it's cultures, which makes a lot more sense to me because that would imply that the skills that you have acquired from your background and so on are based on the culture you were brought up in. So not by dint of your genealogy, but by dint of the culture that you were brought in around. Now, on saying that, they still separate dwarven culture, elven culture, and so on. It does kind of heavily imply that you need to be an elf to be able to have the elf benefits of, like, your elf eyes.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! God!
However, for the most part, the other skills that can be attained are essentially because you were part of that culture. So a less problematic term, basically. And then also they have callings, which is the Lord of the Rings role-playing term for classes. There are 6 in the main book, and I have also translated each of them, at least in my view, from their equivalent class in 5th edition, just to make it a little bit easier when you are thinking of building a character for the first time. In the book, they are Captain, which is essentially the Paladin from 5e, scaled back on the spells, of course, but very much got that kind of feel to it. A warrior that is a leader of men, or whatever other culture you may be representing.
Consider just starting off!
Then you have the Champion, which, ironically, Champion is the name of a subclass in 5e for the fighter, and the Champion is very much a fighter or barbarian, depending on which subcalling you choose, of course. So yes, the Champion is like your fighter or barbarian type. Then you have Messenger. Messenger's an interesting one. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, a mix, I would say, of monk, bard, and rogue, because at later levels you get sneak attack. That's pretty cool. You have an increased movement speed by not wearing armor, very much the monk, and you also have the gift of the gab. You have some charisma-based abilities. It feels very bard-like. Plus, your unarmored defense is based off of dexterity plus charisma. So very much feeling more bard-like, with a flavour of monk and rogue in there as well.
I bring word from Elrond of Rivendell.
Then we have the Scholar. The Scholar it has the feel of, there's a bit of bard in there because they have rhymes of lore, which is essentially like bardic inspiration, but it's also that there are ways of healing, much like a cleric, and by your spells or crafts, as they're known in Lord of the Rings role-playing, the Scholar is kind of like a cleric slash bard slash warlock, because your crafts, your craft slots you get back on a short rest, so it does feel more like a warlock, I would say. But also the only thing that could be classed as anywhere near a wizard in 5th edition would be the Scholar in Lord of the Rings role-playing.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
The last 2 classes, there is the Treasure Hunter, which is very much on the nose a rogue. No 2 ways about that. And the Warden, which is very much a ranger from 5th edition. With the Warden, you are quite likely, I would put money on, that somebody will go for a Ranger of the North with the Warden calling, and they'll basically want to be Aragorn. I have 2 players who have done that. They're great.
There are no travellers in this land, only servants of the Dark Tower.
As touched on before, crafts essentially give you spell-like effects. You can choose crafts when you reach certain levels. It's either you have a choice of either taking a virtue or taking a craft at certain levels, and as a scholar you get crafts anyway. Each of the crafts have a spell-like quality to them. It's obviously got through a Tolkien prism, but it's very much got that feel to it, which of course we'll go through in another video. And then we have virtues, which I would say is the Lord of the Rings role-playing equivalent of feats. And you get these when you reach certain levels. You can only choose each virtue once. Nearly all of the virtues you get to increase just 1 ability score. So essentially all of the virtues, apart from 1, are what you would call half feats in 5e. I think that gives you the general overview in coming from D&D 5th edition and moving into Lord of the Rings role-playing, things that you may need to know or may help you in building your characters, or just picking it up for the first time and not being afraid. Do not be afraid.
Come now. Don't be shy.
I hope that is helpful, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll be back with another video very soon. Thank you so much for tuning in to Slice of the Rings here on Slice and Dice's YouTube channel. If you'd like to see the full uncut version ahead of time, as well as having backstage access to the show and other features besides, check out our Patreon. You can join now from as little as £2 per month, and there's a link to that down below.